Welcome back to Bloodstained Backstories. I'm your host, Jace. Have you ever heard the idea of killing someone could prevent an earthquake? It sounds like something straight out of a horror movie, but in the early 1970s, one man in California believed that this was true. Today we're diving into the disturbing story of Herbert Mullin, a man who murdered 13 people in what he believed were necessary human sacrifices to stop catastrophic earthquakes. Perhaps even more chilling, he wasn't the only serial killer operating in Santa Cruz at this time. Edmund Kemper, who was known as the co-ed killer, was also stalking victims in the same area, sometimes just miles away during that same period. But that's where the similarities end. Kemper targeted young college women in calculated, sexually motivated murders. He was methodical, manipulative, and disturbingly self-aware. Herbert, on the other hand, believed he was saving California. His victims were random: a drifter, a priest, a family, teenage campers, and a retired boxer. There was no sexual motive, no consistent profile, only delusion. Two killers, two completely different psychologies, one small coastal community living in fear. Herbert William Mullen was born on April 18, 1947 in Salinas, California. His father was stern but not abusive. When Herbert was about 5 years old, the family moved to San Francisco. In high school, Herbert appeared well liked, and at 16 he was voted most likely to succeed. No one could have imagined what that would mean. I bet they didn't think it meant most likely to succeed in being a serial killer or most likely to succeed in preventing California earthquakes, that's for sure. After graduating in 1965, tragedy would strike. His close friend Dean Richardson was killed in a car accident. The loss devastated Herbert. Friends later said something changed him. He became obsessed with reincarnation and built shrines to Dean in his room. In 1969, Herbert's mental health had significantly deteriorated. He was admitted to a state hospital and would be committed to 5 different psychiatric facilities over the next several years. Doctors would diagnose him with paranoid schizophrenia. He experienced auditory hallucinations, delusions of grandeur, and religious fixations. His LSD and cannabis use likely intensified the symptoms. Yeah, no shit, and I'm sure that didn't help someone who was having delusions. He was repeatedly released because he was deemed no harm to himself or others. The assessment, however, would prove to be tragically wrong. Herbert began hearing voices, but nothing seemed to help him. He often stopped taking his prescribed medications, and the voices would grow louder and more commanding. He also adopted many different personas. At various times he presented himself as a yoga instructor, an amateur boxer, a wandering hippie, and even a Mexican man who wore a sombrero. His identity seemed fractured, like he was searching for something stable as his mind was unraveling. In 1972, at the age of 25, Herbert would move back in with his parents in Felton, California in Santa Cruz Mountains. Isolated among redwoods, his delusions intensified. He believed his birthday, April 18th, was deeply significant because it marked the anniversary of the 1906 San Francisco earthquake, and to him, this was destiny. Herbert believed a terrifying truth: that during the Vietnam War, enough Americans had died to serve as blood sacrifice to nature, preventing earthquakes. But as American involvement was winding down in the late 1972, he believed the sacrifice was ending and a catastrophic earthquake was imminent. So, in his mind, someone had to continue the bloodshed. He claimed his father communicated him with him telepathically, ordering him to kill. Out of the times he said God and cosmic forces were directing him. No, that's just the LSD. At first, these were thoughts. Then they became urges. Then they became commands. And by October 1972, Herbert believed he was out of time, and on October 13th, 1972, he would act on it. His first victim was Lawrence Whitney White, a 55-year-old drifter. Herbert pretended to have car trouble and lured him to help. As Lawrence leaned over the engine, Herbert beat him to death with a baseball bat. He dragged the body into the woods and later claimed that White had telepathically asked to be sacrificed. 11 days later, on October 24, 1972, Herbert would offer a ride to Cabrillo College to a Cabrillo College student, Mary Margaret Guilfoyle. While driving, he stabbed her. He later disemboweled her, claiming he wanted to examine her organs for signs of environmental pollution. Her remains were discovered months later. On November 2, 1972, he entered a Catholic church and confessed to Father Henry Tomley, who later claimed the priest volunteered as the next sacrifice, and he was brutally beaten and stabbed to death in the confessional. By January 1973, Herbert sought out a former high school friend, Jim Ganina, who he blamed for introducing him to marijuana. He fatally shot Jim, then killed Jim's wife, Joan, and then he returned to the home of Kathleen Francis, who had given him directions, and murdered her and her two sons, who were ages 4 and 9. He stabbed the victims after shooting them. Initially, investigators suspected drug-related violence and did not connect the murders. On February 10, 1973, he encountered 4 teenage boys camping in Henry Cowell Redwood State Park. Robert Spencer, Brian Scott Card, David Oaklear, and Mark DeBralis. Posing as a park ranger, he warned them about polluting the forest, and the next morning he returned with a .22 caliber pistol and shot all 4 in the head inside their tent. He stole their rifle and $20. Ballistics would later connect the weapon to multiple killings. On February 13, 1973, Herbert saw a 72-year-old retired boxer, Fred Perez, gardening. He made a U-turn, braced his rifle on his car hood, and shot Perez in broad daylight. A neighbor witnessed the shooting and wrote down the license plate number, and police quickly pulled over Herbert. He was calm. The murder weapon sat on the passenger seat, and he did not resist arrest. He confessed, believing he had saved California. Initially, authorities struggled to connect the crimes because the victims varied in ages, race, background. The methods were different, ranging from bludgeoning, stabbing, shooting. And all at the same time, Ed Kemper was also killing in the air, adding to the confusion. Mullen's trial would begin on July 30th, 1973. He openly admitted the killings. The question was whether he was legally sane. Prosecutors argued he showed premeditation, luring victims, selecting weapons, and fleeing scenes. Defense attorneys argued his paranoid schizophrenia and command hallucinations made him incapable of understanding his actions. After 14 hours of deliberation, the jury found him guilty on 2 counts of first-degree murder and 8 counts of second-degree murder. He later pled guilty to the murder of Father Tomley in a separate county. He was sentenced to life, and he was denied parole 11 times. While he was incarcerated, Herbert and Ed Kemper were housed near each other. Kemper described Mullen as deeply delusional and often disruptive, singing loudly. Kemper reportedly threw water at him to silence him and used what he jokingly described as behavior modification, rewarding him with peanuts when he was well-behaved. Mullen spent decades in prison, eventually housed at Mole Creek State Prison and then later the California Healthcare Facility. He died on August 12, 2022 at the age of 75 from natural causes. 13 lives lost: a drifter, a college student, a priest, a family, 4 teenagers, and a boxer. And he believed he was a hero, a protector chosen by fate to prevent disaster. But really, untreated mental illness, delusion, and systematic failures left a trail of irreversible devastation. For a brief and terrifying period in 1972 and 1973, Santa Cruz was haunted by not one killer, but 2. I'm Jace, and this has been Bloodstained Backstories. Until next time, stay aware, stay curious, and remember the stories behind the headlines.